When you talk about the City Open, you know, the big picture is it's one of the premier tennis tournaments in the world.
We're very fortunate, and we've had most of the great players in the world play here.
And Yvonne Lendl is the champion here in Washington.
Andre Agassi has done it.
It was one of those rare environments where you felt like you could connect with everybody in the stadium.
Roddick, they love him in Washington.
We still got to discover a lot of players here in Washington.
You're talking about baseball, football, hockey, tennis now is amongst them.
Donald Dell has always been an important figure in tennis in Washington as long as I've been here, which is since 1970. And he was a force. He got the players, he got the sponsors, you know, he got the parking.
Johnny Harris and I were good friends, and we had run a Tennis Australian exhibition out at Pook's Hill. So we decided to try to have a tournament here in the public park. And the reason we chose the public park originally was because of Arthur Ashe.
Arthur Ashe was a lifelong friend of Donald Dell. He, at that time, in the mid-70s, was among the top 3 or 4 players in the world. He won the US Open. You know, he was just such a magnetic figure, and people in Washington flocked to him.
Our good friend Arthur Ashe committed to play here if he could see some African-American faces in the audience.
And Arthur said, why don't we look at some sites? We ought to have a tournament here in Washington. So I said, well, let's go look. And he said, I'll play in the tournament as long as you put it in a naturally integrated area. And so we picked Rock Creek Park because really it is integrated and has been in a natural way for well over 50 years. And so that's what Arthur really liked about it.
More than anyone else, Arthur Ashe brought tennis to the people.
Johnny and I ran the tournament in 69, 70, and 71, and we were getting really good responses from the crowds, and that's when we decided in 1972 to give the tournament sanction to WTEF, Washington Tennis and Education Foundation.
Washington Tennis and Education Foundation is a group who provide a rare combination of tennis and education to children who live in underserved communities in an effort to disrupt things that might prevent them otherwise from being successful.
Every year when we make a difference with the Washington Tennis and Education Foundation, you're not just running a tennis tournament, but you're making a difference in children's lives. And that's a memory that I had, you know, for every year I was tournament director.
That's really what motivated us, was to try to build a lot more young Arthur Ashes in this community.
Tennis has given both Donald and myself a lot, and we felt we had a debt, so gave it to the foundation.
There was no stadium here. There was just a center court in the sense that they probably had 40 or 50 seats around it, but it wasn't really a stadium. It was a clay court. And then we started building it up right away, put temporary stands in. In 1989, we decided to build a stadium here.
And it was a big commitment. Donald and I were able to meet with Jim Clark of Clark Construction, and they agreed to build it. It was about $12.5 million, and the foundation had a fundraising committee, and we got commitments. You know, if you bought a box, bought a suite, we got it done.
What I liked about the stadium court there was I always felt like it had the right size and intimacy to it.
Agassi back on center court now, a big hand.
Andre Agassi is one of those athletes that has such a presence, and I remember my first year coming here and watching him on court, and the crowd would erupt at every single point that he would win. Like, it was an energy and an atmosphere that you can't even really describe.
Crowd loves him. They're giving him a standing ovation.
It was one of those rare environments where you felt like you could connect with everybody in the stadium.
No question, this is one that for some reason I step on the court, I just play some of my best tennis. It's just such a wonderful feeling to come back to a place that's so familiar and so, in a sense, comfortable for me.
We're very fortunate, and we've had most of the great players in the world play here. We've had Arthur Ashe, Ken Rosewall, McEnroe, Agassi, Lendl, Jimmy Connors.
To have Jimmy Connors on your champions board is obviously pretty special. He won the tournament when it was on clay and also when it became hard. The only champion to do that, he won it 3 times. You know, nobody can get a crowd energized like Connors.
You had to prove yourself when you were 20 and 21 and 22 years old, trying to really make a name for yourself.
Now Andy Roddick has arrived.
Andy Roddick won the tournament when he was 18 years old. It was his first hardcourt tournament.
Roddick They love him in Washington.
He was just a kid, and being one of his first titles in the U.S., in D.C., and he just kept coming back every year, and he ended up winning the title multiple times. And between him and Andre and James Blake, just, you know, three great American champions that we were fortunate to have over the years.
It is hot and steamy down here on center court. Temperature is well above 110 degrees.
You got to have some guts to want to come and play in Washington. In the heat and humidity, you got to be tough.
And we will have a test of Will's because it is extremely hot today.
I always loved playing in the heat, but it was a constant negotiation, drying off and trying not to get your grip too wet. I mean, it was one of the only tournaments in the world where I'd literally go through 2-3 shirts a set.
Crucial changeover as Agassi changes shirts. And now look at Stefan Edberg trying to stay cool out here.
Back in the old days, all we had was tents down at 16th Street, and everyone was dying in the heat.
From playing Edberg in the finals on one of the hottest days ever, beating him 7-5 in the third. I think it was one of the first times they let both of us sit down for the ceremony at the end because we were just pretty much spent. But if you could get through there, we were pretty much set to be in shape for the rest of the summer.
From a local standpoint, it's been a real launching pad for players throughout the metropolitan area. Harold Solomon won the event in 1974, and he's from Silver Spring, and I believe he reached number 5 in the world.
Then you turn around and you see what's happening with Francis, who's a totally different player, and the game has changed. You know, he uses the two-hand occasionally, hits the daylights out of the ball.
To me, just having grown up in the game, I started when I was 8, back in 1961. There wasn't a real path of professional tennis that you could make a career at. In fact, I was about 3 or 4 years on the tour, and my grandmother kept asking me when I was going to get a real job. And now standing here talking about 50 years of the City Open. I won in 1980, and a few years before that, a couple of guys by the name of Cliff Ritchie and Andres Chimeno from Spain were playing. Ritchie had a fiery temper. He was a fiery Texan. Got a bad bounce on the service line, and you just see smoke coming out of his ears. But he walked up to the service line, reached down, grabbed the service line up from the clay, and just yanked it up out of the ground. So he's now standing with a service line from sideline to sideline above his head. I think that eventually led to the code of conduct.
My boy Andre was all decked up in his clothes. This old veteran looked at him and beat the tar out of him. So I left the coach's box, and he's across the street in the park. I walked across the street. Pow! Broke a racket. Pow! Broke another racket. I looked at him, I said, son, what's the problem? He said, Nick, I don't have it. I can't do it. I said, don't you ever use the word I can't. Do you hear me? Next week we went to Stratton Mountain. That began the whole thing.
In 2012, our sponsor, Citi, came to us and said, look, we want to sponsor the tournament, but we don't want it to be a men's-only event, so we'd like a combined event. In 2012, we integrated with the men.
And that's something that very few tournaments have in the world. So we could say that we're one of only 5 tournaments in the U.S. that actually has combined men's and women's tournaments.
Washington fans have been able to see great female players who have gone on to win Grand Slams.
Number 2 in the world, Caroline Wozniacki's coming back. 2017 U.S. Open champion Sloane Stephens, who won her first title here in 2015. Ekaterina Makarova, who won last year.
She's done it. A beaming smile is Ekaterina Makarova at 29 years of age.
And then on the double side, Shuko Aoyama, who has won this tournament 4 times, and if she can come back this year and win her 5th title, she will then tie Andre Agassi for most titles in DC.
The 50th is an opportunity for us to really show the world what's going on in DC.
I love the game, and I love seeing how it's grown and see what the players are able to do nowadays, what they're playing for. To me, it's just special to be a part of it. We're all in this big fraternity called professional tennis.
The City Open brought us to the top where we are now. We now attract the top male and female players in the world. You're talking about baseball, football, hockey, tennis now is amongst them.
DC is such a good market for tennis. We have an incredible field. I thought last year we had the best ever, but if you look at the names, the rankings, this year certainly tops that.
The
best thing is we are the only tournament which still exists at its original venue in the United States for 50 years.
Congratulations, City Open, for 50 years.
50 years. Not many things in sports get to say 50 years, but the City Open does. That's a great thing.
I wish City Open a happy 50th anniversary, and I think it's well deserved. I think it's been around for that long because of the people, quite frankly. It's the spirit, the culture there. They were there with a generous spirit, and I just wish them another 50 years.